to reflect. So it also allows me to reflect on some of my
sorry, just one sec. It looks like we've there was a mistake in the recording, but we have started recording now. So this is the cost of online people. So for online people, we have been talking with Professor Omprakash Gnawali from University of Houston, and right now he's talking about how to choose between industry and academia for someone who just graduated.
Right. Yeah. So the question is, how do you pick between the two, and what is my decision-making process, right? Basically, when I was in, as I said, I found the field of computing pretty fascinating. I was doing some research starting my undergraduate years. On one hand, I kind of wanted to continue that because I thought that was kind of interesting, right? So basically, if you're doing something that you didn't really have to do, and it was painful, but not too painful to just work for hours and hours, especially when you didn't have to do, that's a good sign that, okay, maybe, that's something for you. So that was definitely the case for me, right? And that's probably the case for many of you also. So that means you're kind of interested in computing, in my case, or your computing related research. So basically, one of my earliest experiences in research was related to systems. So basically, operating systems, distributed systems, and things like that. I thought that was very interesting, and because I was already familiar with it, and we kind of tend to make these decisions based on familiarity a lot of times in life, right? So because if you already know something, you're comfortable, and everything else is scary. You don't know what you're jumping into, right? So, it's a comfort sometimes, that is what you do. So basically, one aspect of decision-making is exactly that, which is, I was already doing some research. I knew what was going on. So, and then it was also not, it was interesting, right? So then there's no reason to not continue that. So that's, one decision-making process. But so at least, I shared basically, my aspect, but, over time, I've advised, many students, and I've also seen many of my friends, colleagues, go through this decision-making process and make their own decisions as to what works better for them, deciding between industry and academia. Unfortunately, so this decision is almost an irreversible decision for most of us. I'm not going to say it's for every single person, but for most of us, you kind of have to pick one or the other at some point, right? There are exceptions, but those are rare. So the most important thing to keep in mind is, one is not superior to the other. I think both are, equally valuable to the society. So, there's no, okay, this one is better than the other. And some of the myths is, okay, if you are more capable, you need to do X versus Y. That's also not true. There are really, smart people in industry as well as academia. So, I don't think it's a matter of you need to do X versus Y depending on how capable you are, right? So basically, to be very impactful, you need to be very capable, either in industry or academia. Now, I'm going to talk a little bit more on the monetary side, which is an important aspect of life, right? So we can't completely ignore money. Money is important, right? So so the way to think about money, at least in countries like the US, is in academia or industry, you're going to live a very comfortable life. So at least as long as your desires are not astronomical, you can be perfectly happy being in academia, especially in science and engineering field. And it's okay to actually talk about numbers, right? So usually you get a faculty job after a PhD. That's almost required in pretty much all the circumstances in the US universities. So if you are in, let's say, computer science, engineering type field, your starting salary is going to be, $100,000 to $150,000 a year. So which is a decent amount of money to live a very comfortable life in the US. Now, with a PhD, if you go to software industry right now, your salary is probably going to be, $50,000 to probably $200,000 or $300,000 more if you include all the benefits if you go to industry, right? So basically, starting salary might be, I don't know, $200,000 almost these days, depending on the area in the industry. And if you add all the benefits, it might be $300,000 or $400,000 a year, right? So definitely the salaries are lower in academia, but if you just look at the base salary, it's not that different, at least when you're starting out. And that's not even the main point. The main point is the salary is actually good enough to live a very comfortable life. So that's something to keep in mind. So if you do not have astronomical monetary needs, monetary factor would be a non-issue. An academic versus industry job, right? So now that thing is out of the way, then it really is about what you do, for work that you find meaningful. Now, there's going to be things that are really good about academia, and there's going to be things that people find to be not very interesting, depending on your personality, right? So in academia, you get to work, you get to at least decide the domain of work to some extent, but it's not 100% in the sense that sometimes you do have to operate within the needs of the department, right? Let's say, your expertise is in, let's say in theory, right? And if a course needs to be taught, let's say in data structures and algorithms, the department is going to ask you to teach that course because it kind of makes sense, right? That's your expertise. So there is no 100% freedom in terms of what you want to work on, but there's a tremendous amount of freedom, especially when it comes to research area in the US in terms of exactly what you decide to work on. So that's the positive part. The negative part may be, especially if the teaching load is very high, then a lot of faculty find that to be very overwhelming in terms of workload and also just how swamped they are. Now on the industry side, it can be very exciting to come up with new ideas and then bring these products to the market and actually see people basically be able to do things that they were not able to do without your product. So that can be very exciting as well. But many of us may not have the opportunity to create new ideas, create new products in the industry necessarily always, right? A lot of times, just talking about, the good thing is get to see tremendous impact in the real world directly, but also there are some downsides as well, depending on your specific circumstances in the industry. You may not find the particular task very interesting, but the company really needs that task done, and you just put your head down and do it, right? So basically, I think, so those are some of the things to think about. One is, first of all, one is not necessarily better than the other. And if the exact idea that you want to work on is the most important thing for you, then academia is probably a better choice for you. But even in the industry, you can start an idea, especially if it is impactful. You can do your own startup with your idea and hopefully basically bring that to the finish line. You could also do that, right? So I think it really depends on some of these other aspects. Basically, not necessarily, smart people should be doing X, or, well, if you become a professor, you're going to be poor, right? That's also, as I said, that's at least in science and engineering, that is not true. You may not be very rich, but you will live a very comfortable life, at least in the US.
Yeah, that's good to know because I think one of the reasons people decide to go to industry is because of money. Okay, so we have a lot more things to cover as well. So let me just go right into your research areas. As I said earlier, I looked into your publication page, and there's almost 100 referenced papers. And if we add the thesis and book chapters and posters and demo and so on, it's more than 100. And your research is scattered like into various areas. Your MIT thesis was on the peer-to-peer network keyword set search, and then in PhD you worked on the routing and management of wireless sensor networks, and now you are working on IoT and still probably various sensors and communication devices and so on. Could you talk a little bit about your research journey and how all the dots connect, and maybe talk a little bit about your recent research?
Okay, great. And I think I should talk a little bit at this point because we basically are probably have about 15, 20 minutes remaining. So basically, the broad area of my work happens to be in area called systems and networking. Basically, at least the bulk of my research. So uh, basically, systems area deals with building better computers in a sense. Depending on the setting, you may need to build smaller computers, right? Or faster computers, or more energy efficient computers, things like that, right? So, and on the networking side, it's related to basically improving networking approximately along the same dimensions. For example, we all want faster networks, right? Or we want more energy efficient networks. We want more reliable networks. So basically, so that's the broad area of systems and networking. Now, if you want to relate that to some of the technological trends that we see in the world. Basically, what does systems and networking lead to, right? In terms of the actual real world application. So it's basically, you can think of, rise of data centers, cloud computing, high speed networking, a lot of the underlying research related to, all of those technological trends would be systems and networking. And there's another aspect, and also IoT, by the way. So a lot of the underlying technology you could categorize in that area. And then the third area in which I have worked traditionally, a fair bit, is basically sensing technologies. So I kind of started working on it in the context of sensor networks, about 20 years ago, and these technologies have become, a lot more important today. So, we started with things like, okay, if we wanted to collect lots of temperature or, environment data from a park, or let's say infrastructure. Let's say you wanted to collect a lot of vibration, basically data related to how bridges are vibrating, because vibration information might be useful to understand how the infrastructure is behaving, right? So that's a sensing related question. So there are a lot of sensing related questions that are very interesting to us as human beings. Who is in a particular room, or is someone is walking by some hallway? These are all sensing related questions. And as you can imagine, there's just lots and lots of interesting sensing related questions we want to ask about the real world, right? And what is really interesting is, a lot of these areas have kind of evolve in a way to become really, really important for everyday computing use today. And a good example is a case study of smartphones. Sensing is obviously really important because we want to take pictures, we want to speak to it, right? And we want to interact with it in various ways, including fingerprints or touch screens, etc. So those are all sensing related questions. We definitely want smartphones to be energy efficient. We want it to be fast, and we want to be able to access internet resources really quickly and energy efficiently. So that's sort of the broad area that leverages research in systems and networking to improve the state of the technology.
Great. So yeah, mostly you have been working in the sensing related areas, you said. So I'm curious how your research findings or research can be applied in the real world, or if there is any applications in the context of Nepal or anything like that.
Yeah. So I would say, I think at least for this question, it's kind of interesting to relate to, how research journey may not be that different from the typical journey that you see in startups. So, research, tends to be an exploration of new and, many of them promising ideas, but in the end, a lot of these ideas are not going to be very useful. We thought these are going to be useful. We thought these are going to change the world, but most of them turns out they're not as useful, at least at the time being, right? So basically, that's the trajectory and fate of most of the research. So hopefully that knowledge that was created would be indirectly useful maybe for something else, or you know, or maybe at a different time. But a lot of times, some of these ideas may, not be useful. Just like, most of the startups, they will explore some really interesting idea, and in the end, maybe there are not enough customers, or turns out the business model was not right. So you actually see in a similar trajectory, in terms of evolution of research ideas. So in that context, you could say that, most of the things that I talked about turns out they were not that useful, at least immediately, in a direct way, right? Like, lost a lot of my research, and that would be the case for many research, and that's totally fine, because the whole point is to explore many new ideas, and then hopefully a good fraction of those ideas turn out to be very useful. Now, I have worked on, as I said, low power wireless systems. You mentioned sensing. Yes, I've worked on sensing, but I also worked on low power wireless systems, and some of my work has directly influenced the creation of some of the standards related to IPv6 low power wireless systems. So there's at least a little bit of a direct industry impact. And some of the code that I wrote, they were open source, and that code was actually widely used at one point in industry and in research and in education by others. So that's, another type of impact that I was very pleased to see. And sometimes it's just a matter of luck in terms of how these things evolve. And now, in terms of direct applications of some of these things to Nepal, I have not seen a lot of direct impact of what I've worked on in Nepal. I have worked on one project in which we were able to develop some sensing system that we were able to deploy in Nepal about a year and a half ago in the context of a clean cooking project. But I have not, unfortunately, I have not seen direct impact from my work in countries like Nepal yet.
I see. Usually research, cutting edge research usually might take some time to really pan out. So I think that's some property of research. So we are almost out of time. So it's 10 minutes remaining until the hour is done. So before we go to the audience, I wanted to ask you just last question, because you have been recently exploring how you can apply the information technology to accelerate the development in developing countries like Nepal. And in Nepal these days there have been digital revolution. A lot of software companies are popping up left and right, and there is a thriving kind of IT scene there, and government is also on that. And in the meantime, you are also trying to look at similar thing, maybe that how this software can be applied to develop countries like Nepal. So what's your kind of vision on that? Like, is Nepal in the right direction, or in your work, like, do you think there is differences in technology between developing countries versus developed countries, and some of your thoughts on this topic?
Yeah, so I have some opinions about this, right? And I'm not an expert in that area, but certainly been spending some time thinking about this area in the last year or two. So basically, in countries like Nepal, we still need to put a lot of information online and make it really easy to access that information. We're still in that stage, and I think there's just a tremendous benefit that we can just by doing a lot better job of those two things, right? We're doing better and better job of putting information online, from businesses to government. But in terms of making it easy to find and use, I think we have a long way to go. So I think this is in terms of high tech, this is the low tech, in my opinion, right? Putting stuff online and making things easy to use. But I think in the next few years, That is probably the number one thing that will have the most impact in Nepal. Just putting more information online and making it easy to find so that people don't have to, waste time, traveling somewhere just to learn that, okay, to get a citizenship certificate, here are the 5 documents that you need. You don't have to travel all the way to, district headquarters, and then they will tell you, oh yeah, you need these 5 documents. Now you go back to your village and then get this particular document done and come back, right? That's such a utter waste of time. So this is, so some of these things have become better, but they're just, especially access to information from the consumer side is at a very primitive stage. Because, you know, in Nepal, the government has put a lot of information online, but you need to know where it is. You might need to know how to read legal language sometimes. You may need to download, very, large PDFs and stuff like that. So that's just not the way people are ready to consume information in Nepal, because they may have very low power smartphone. And as citizens, they do need access to all of that information, right? And then same with the businesses. So in my personal opinion, so this is just my view, that putting more information online and making it easy to access information, we have a long way to go, and that's the easiest and the most impactful thing to do. And then, after that, there are lots of other standard things. We don't have to have a lot of imagination, right? Being able to, do bill payments online, being able to summon various services, like Uber, etc. I mean, there are a lot of interesting things, but we still have a long way to go in just making information available to the people who need it. Just let me just pose a very simple example, right? If we want to find out, what are all the subsidy programs or scholarships available, it's impossible for you to find out. And I'm not saying this problem has been solved in developed countries, but if you go ask a random student in a village in Nepal saying, hey, do you know what scholarships are available to you as a citizen of Nepal? Do you think that person, knows that? Probably not. Unfortunately, that information may also be available on government websites, by the way, in PDF forms or other meeting minutes and things like that. So I think that is the disconnect that we really need to address. And another very concrete example is, let's say if you're an entrepreneur in Nepal and you want to open a small restaurant, do you know what government programs are available to you? Do you know what business programs are available to you? There's probably lots and lots of programs and resources available to that person, but there is no way of knowing that easily. And most people are going to say, well, I don't really know anyone in high places in the government, and that may be useful for you to actually get those, subsidies or loans or etc. Right? Because that's, unfortunately, that's how it works. But it is very difficult to find information that already exists that could be utilized immediately by average citizens in Nepal. So that's my view, guys.
Thank you. Before opening up to the audience, do you have any final words or anything you wanted to say?
Yeah. So let me just say that at least for me, for those of us who live in the US, let's just talk about that first, right? As I said earlier, making, more and more money is always good, right? That's always a good thing. But ultimately, at least my personal struggle, and I still struggle every day today, is to find impactful work. And, I try my best to say, hey, when I work on some things, is this going to be meaningful, for me and for others? And that's a struggle that I have every day. And I encourage you to bring a little bit of that struggle in your life as well. Now, if you're in the US, right? Now, if you're in Nepal or countries like Nepal, you may not have that privilege to do that 100%, right? Because, making money is a little bit harder. Living comfortably is a little bit harder in Nepal. And, I understand and appreciate that. But still, I think at least you should keep this in your thought, because ultimately, as I said, making more and more money and having bigger and bigger house, that's always great. It's never a bad thing, right? But if we can bring a little bit of this struggle, I think that will also allow us to live a very meaningful life.
Thank you. That's great message. And I'd like to just hand it over to Prathna to handle the questions from the audience. I think I saw one question from Yudhishthir Dai, and we can have more questions if anyone is interested.
Sure. We can start with the question that was asked in the chat, and then if anyone wants to ask the question, we can go there. So the question on the chat is, what are the cutting edge problems in Professor Gnawali's research fields?
Okay. So let me just answer that very briefly, right? So basically, as I said, a lot of the technologies that I work on, they kind of lead to, let's just say, better and better smartphones. Now, we can think about, okay, what might the smartphones look like many years from now? And I will just say, I have no idea, but we can probably extrapolate at least a few trends, right? So, smartphones will probably become more and more powerful. So what that means is that they'll be able to do a lot more compute, a lot more information processing, because it seems like we all want that, and a lot of people are working in that area. Now, if you're talking about the networking side of smartphones, we do need to make them more energy efficient, because the networking does consume a lot of energy on the smartphones, and we want them to be faster and reliable. So that's sort of the area in which a lot of the people who do research in my area, work on. And one other, basically type of technology that we have not seen a lot yet, but they are starting to become more and more important, are basically location-based technology. You guys probably heard of ultra-wideband related products in Apple and other smartphone and other IoT gadget manufacturers are coming up with. For example, if you lose your key at home, you should be able to find out exactly where it is. So if you put some location tracking tags that you don't need to charge for a year or two, that are very small, you can just put it in your key tag, right? And then if you put that along with your key, you should be able to pinpoint, just like a GPS location, wherever it is, right? Like at any given point in time. So basically, those are called location technologies. In the outdoor environment and navigation, location technologies already have had a lot of impact, but also tracking, asset tracking and object tracking would also probably see a lot of work. So I think these are some of the areas that are likely to advance significantly in the near future.
I see. Okay, we have another question from Abhishek. The question is, I'm curious about professors' thoughts around sensing technologies and their impact on privacy and security.
Yeah, so fortunately or unfortunately, I don't have any new insights there, beyond what you probably heard hundreds of times. Clearly, sensing and data gathering is clearly useful. We benefit from it every day, but it can also be misused, as we've heard, around the world. So I think as a society, we are having a conversation as a society today to determine, basically what is a good trade-off there, and how we need to manage the evolution of technology and the power of technology in that space. So we're going to continue to have this conversation as a society, and probably, we'll come up with a pretty good answer, in the next few years.
Right. Thank you for that. We are a little over time, but okay, let's make this our. Okay, there's two questions here. Just wanted to confirm, is it okay if we go over the questions? Okay, all right. So the second last question here, what are some of the common reasons or mistakes that PhD students make that cause them to fail or drop out of the program?
Okay, so I've advised many students and have seen many PhD students go through or not go through PhD program. I was a PhD student myself, so I can kind of relate to this question. So, first of all, we realize that, okay, money is a lot more important for us, even in the short term, than we thought it was. So that's kind of the interesting equation to this, that can lead to some of these, unexpected outcomes when it comes to a PhD student trajectory. And the other is, research is just like any other work, right? If you ask, many of you are professionals, and yes, your work is exciting, right? Always, but when you're getting down to it and debugging this one line that just says, x equal to 2, but the value of 2 is not in x, and I don't know why. So, it's just x equal to 2. That's the line, right? But when you execute that, the value of x is 3. Now, what do? Right? Is it the compiler that's screwed up, or is it the runtime system? Now, that may or may not be exciting, because what you really wanted to do is build this amazing application and deploy it to the world, right? But now you're stuck with this statement called x equal to 2. So a lot of that happens in research as well, right? So at a high level, innovating and creating new technologies may be very exciting, but when it's time to execute, there may be a lot of things that many would consider just a chore. So, just like any other job, sometimes the not so interesting and exciting part of the job just may overwhelm you. So sometimes there's a disconnect between what we think PhD is versus what it is. Just like in the industry, right? When you're working on a startup, you think, oh, wow, I'm going to create this thing, everyone's going to use it. But in the end, in a lot of times, you're just sitting there and debugging a few things sometimes, right? So there's that disconnect. So basically, money-related matters could be a factor, and sometimes our lack of understanding of what a research job is could also be a factor. And then number 3, before PhD, we were very used to a very structured educational environment where, okay, this semester you take this course and you do this homework and you do this project. And once you get to PhD in most, in Europe and in most universities in the US, there is just not a whole lot of structure. Basically, you have to figure out, okay, what are the milestones and how to make progress. And this lack of structure can also be unnerving, and many of us would not be prepared for it. And that's the reason why many of us struggle in the PhD program.
All right. Okay, let's get to the last question here. Do you have any actionable ideas that we folks in the US can take to lead a more meaningful life?
So, I'm older than you guys, but I'm not 70 yet. So I cannot claim, I have all the wisdom in the world, right? One of the realizations that we all need to make is if you're going to live in the US, right? If you're going to live in the US, and especially if you're going to work in the tech sector, you are going to have an extremely comfortable life no matter what. So, we should be making our decisions on what we want to do based on money, obviously. As I said, money is really important, right? But it may not be as important as you might be thinking, especially if you are making most of your decisions based on money. I think rather than what we should be doing, I can at least say, based on my experiences, life experiences and realizations, and looking at my friends, family, students, etc. Right? So I think that is the one thing that we should not be doing, especially if we're in tech sector, because ultimately we're all going to live a very comfortable life. First of all, I think most of us who live in the US, regardless of what job we do, we're going to live a comfortable life, right? And especially if we're in tech sector, we're going to live an extremely comfortable life. So let's not forget that, guys. That's number 1, right? And number 2, regardless of what you do, if you're going to live an extremely comfortable life, why not spend a little bit of time and basing at least a small part of your decision based on what would really make you happy in terms of work or impact. So I think basically that is sort of how I think about it, and that's the reason I've also kind of reformulated my research directions in my direct work, right? And I think this is an opportunity that all of you have in tech sector. Also, even if you are living in Nepal, you're still going to be making a lot more money than many other people. You're going to live a perfectly comfortable life. So unless you want to build a biggest house possible, or unless you want to eat the most food possible, rest assured that you're gonna just have a great life, at least in terms of material successes in life. I think you guys are all gonna do great. So just create a little bit of void in your life, a little bit of room in your life to think about, what would really, make you happy. I think that is what I can offer. But it is a struggle for me, as I said, and having a little bit of that struggle is really important, in my opinion.
Thank you so much for that. All right, I can hand it over to you, either Pramod Dai or Abhishek Dai. The plan, our plan was to just stick around for some informal